It was kind of you all to wait for me up on stage before sitting. This is a neat panel this morning because we've got so many different perspectives on this kind of general issue of basic research in the sciences and biomedical science, more specifically. Stephen, I want to sort of start with you. Doing work out of a university, tell us what's exciting. What are you seeing in the lab structurally, such that, like, how is it easier to do basic research than it might have been 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, I think for me personally, I think it always comes down to the quality of the people that you have access to who want to work with you. And of course, being in Boston and Harvard and Brigham Women's Hospital, we have a lot of really top-notch people. And after that, it's really about funding, and it's how do you get the money to follow up on your ideas, the things that you're excited about, and then it's a hodgepodge at that point. And I've been very fortunate because one of my funders is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. I've also gotten funding in the past from the Gates Foundation, so private money there, but also from the NIH and the Department of Defense occasionally, and things like that. So you're always looking around to try to find a niche of money that you can use to develop your ideas. And I think, you know, that's exciting, but it's also getting a little tougher as time goes on, and there's a lot of pressure on the budget, as you're aware, especially the NIH budget. In the last few years, it's been rather stagnant. It grew for a while, and then we had the big market downfall. And since then, it's been static or constantly reducing. So that's a real challenge. And where that impacts science in general is that it starts to limit certain types of research. And I think one of the areas that has been impacted is basically model organism research. And this is the very basic work where people or individuals are out there following their ideas in model organisms, and that means not humans, but yeast and bacteria and maybe mice and Drosophila, all these esoteric organisms. But they come up with really incredible findings. And one of them, of course, you've probably all heard of, is called CRISPR. The CRISPR-Cas9 revolution. It's hard to escape it, but it's made a tremendous impact on science today, and it's allowed so much to happen. And that was all by studying odd bacteria and their genomes. And now it evolved into a method that allows us to turn on and off genes in humans and correct mutations or create mutations in human cells and stem cells. And it's really going to lead to a tremendous number of cures for diseases in the future, but it also facilitates people like me in the lab to do genetics and ask questions about human genes and what they do, because now precisely we can turn them on and off at will and study the differences under those conditions. So that's really exciting to a geneticist like myself.
I applaud your modesty in not mentioning some very interesting work that you yourself are doing that I read about in the New York Times. Now tell me if I have this right. I have a feeling that I'm going to get it wrong, but this is that with a single drop of human blood, you can detect every virus that's in the human body at that moment. Is that right?
It's ability to look at all the viruses you've been infected with, because every time a pathogen attacks you or gets into your body, your immune system kicks in and addresses that, and it does so in a way that leaves a footprint, and these are antibodies. So you have antibodies in your blood to every pathogen you've ever been infected with, and we built a method that is very sensitive and very systematic that allows you to look at all those antibodies and detect which antibodies exist in your blood, which then tells you what viruses you've been infected with in the past or currently, chronically.
That's amazing. Julie, is there an equivalent in the funding world? So you are the Director of Development at the Foundation for NIH, and is there a CRISPR in the funding world? Is there a big leap forward, something like that you've seen in the last 5-10 years that's kind of pumped a bunch of new money into basic research?
maybe not something quite as big a breakthrough as something like CRISPR, but certainly, I think as I would imagine will be part of the discussion along the entire path of today, it's just partnerships and an ability to do them more and more effectively. I mean, a lot of people are doing partnerships now. The Foundation for NIH was created about 20 years ago, and that's one of the things we've been doing for 20 years now, is just bringing all of the players together and sort of keeping them together throughout achieving whatever they're together to achieve. So getting everybody together, making sure that there can be an effective discussion about what the course is that you're going to take, how you're going to take it, make sure there's, a comfortably equitable sort of investment. And I think people are, some people are better at that than others. Some people are more inclined to do it than others. But that really is, I think, it doesn't sound very exciting, but I think it's a key to getting a lot done.
Who have been the leading universities in these partnerships?
All of the big universities that have all the famous scientists are leading in that sort of thing. And those decisions are made for us. The projects that we work on are led by the National Institutes of Health, or are developed in response to requests for application that we might do. So that's kind of the whoever rises to the top in that tends to be the ones that work, and certainly there are a lot of them that are good at it. So.
Were there worries initially that, say, big pharma money would come with strings attached that professors may not like to deal with, and have they been borne out?
There are always worries. There were worries when I started at the FNIH 13 years ago, and there are worries about that today with every funder that we have. It's one of the reasons we exist, is to kind of create a little bit of a firewall and some arm's length between industry and academia and the federal government, to make sure that there's no influence put unduly on the science. But I will say that we work with scientists in all of those worlds, and they have different perspectives, but they're all there to achieve the science. So at the end of the day, I don't really see it. I think people want to get what they want done, and there might be disagreements about timelines, or should we do this analysis or that analysis, but no, I haven't seen any looming evilness in partners.
That's a good quote. Dan, so you have a unique experience. You founded a company that was doing groundbreaking Alzheimer's research, Avid, and you were working very much in the lean startup mode. And recently you were acquired by Eli Lilly, one of the larger pharmaceutical companies. Can you tell me which of those two environments has been more supportive for your kind of pure creative research work?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. It's something I think about a lot. And actually, my career started, as many of us did, in academia. So I've had experience in all the different arenas. And I'll tell you, when I was in academia, thinking about what companies do, I thought, well, this is where discoveries come from. It's from academic institutions, and we have the best minds. And then when I went into the biotech world, my perspective shifted, and I thought, well, this is actually where we can take great ideas that may have been sparked by basic research in academia and turn them into breakthroughs for patients. In my case, working on Alzheimer's disease. And we had great scientists working really hard. Then when I went to pharma, my eyes were open to the sort of industrial scale research and development that we can do. And the opportunities that we have in a pharmaceutical company to do great science, but do it in a way that brings medicines to patients. And I thought, this is the best place to be. But now I realize that we have great scientists in each of these domains, and it's actually the interaction of all the parties that can make great things possible. So in Alzheimer's disease, we've particularly been beneficiaries of the kind of collaboration you just heard about across government and industry and biotech companies all working together to do studies. Our goal is actually to make Alzheimer's a preventable disease, but that means you have to go really early. So we're trying to detect the disease in the brain through advanced imaging techniques even before people have symptoms, and then test new medicines in people who don't yet have any symptoms of the disease. That's very difficult to do. I don't think a pharma company could do it on their own. A biotech company certainly can't do it. It's out of the realm of academia. But when we all come together and sponsored by NIH and industry together, it's something we can achieve. And those trials are going on today. And I think that's the greatest hope that we have now for stemming this looming public health crisis of Alzheimer's disease.
What does the footprint on a study like that look like? How many people, what size lab?
Yeah, so these are studies that aren't contained in a single lab or a single institution or even a single country. Mm-hmm. We do these trials all over the world involving thousands and thousands of individuals that we might follow over time with sequential visits and imaging and testing for 4 years or 5 years, or it could be even more. And so that kind of scope at the leading edge of science is extremely high risk, but will teach us so much about Alzheimer's disease, and we can only do it through partnership.
I know that you don't speak for Eli Lilly as a whole, but I'm going to ask you to. Sure. As I understand it, Eli Lilly has identified Alzheimer's, oncology, immunology, what's the fourth? Diabetes.
Yes.
It's kind of the big 4 research focus areas. Is that how is that decision process made? Is that because those 4 areas are most ripe for innovation, or is it because there's the largest market opportunity? Those aren't mutually exclusive, but...
Sure. Yeah, so when we think about the areas that we want to work as a company, and we have tremendous resources to invest in research and development every year, it's really been at the intersection of where's their unmet medical need? Where do patients need a breakthrough? And that has to intersect with breaking science, because if the science isn't happening in that area, we won't be able to deliver. And when we see the intersection of those two things, that's where we focus our resources. And so, I talked a little bit about the breakthroughs in Alzheimer's, our understanding of the disease, our ability to detect it in a pre-symptomatic phase. In oncology, you heard about the tremendous breakthroughs that we're making with targeted therapies and with immuno-oncology. So that's a hugely important area for us. In diabetes, we've been active in this area for so long, improving the life of people with diabetes. Now, for the first time, we're pleased with a partner, BI, to have a medicine that actually improves survival from cardiac death in patients with diabetes. So we're seeing breakthroughs in that area. And then finally, in immunology, it's our understanding of the immune system and how autoimmune diseases work has really just opened up in the last couple of years, and we're seeing so many new medicines. In each of these areas, the goal is not to deliver sort of a small, incrementally better medicine. It's to deliver breakthroughs that change patients' expectations. Medicines where people will look back and say, I can't imagine what my life was like 5 years ago when we didn't have that new medicine. That's what we're looking for. It's not easy, but we're trying that in each of those areas.
Julie, one of the attractive things about getting out of Washington to come do this event is to not talk about our new administration. But nonetheless, how is this new political environment sort of going over at NIH? What sort of changes are you all worried about, excited about?
Well, I can't really speak for NIH because we're a separate nonprofit, but we do work more closely with them than some do. And I can certainly say that there's some eagerness to see how things will play out, as there is with any change in administrations, because there's always, a different bit of a focus. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the directorship of the NIH and the NCI, both of which are presidential appointments, so people are interested to see how that will really resolve itself. I think everybody is expecting that it's a time where we'll need to be adaptable and just see how things evolve. But hopefully it'll be a good climate for partnership. This is certainly a president who seems to like private sector investment in things, so hopefully that will be good for all of us.
Stephen, you mentioned earlier, before going on at length about funding, you said people really make up kind of our huge success factor in doing basic research at somewhere like Harvard. And I wonder how has, even though it was stalled in the courts, how has the travel ban sort of affected the research community?
Well, I would say, I know for a fact that there was a person in my lab who wanted to go back to Iran for for their New Year's celebration that canceled that immediately
Yeah.
for fear of not being able to get back in the first iteration of the ban. And I think it's going to have a chilling effect, and not just on the people who are banned, because it is a relatively small group of people, and assuming once they fix it so that the people with green cards and legitimate visas can get back in, that's one thing. But I think it's chilling on a lot of people who are worried about what the climate is going to be in the United States and whether they really want to come here and do their postdoctoral work or their graduate work or someplace else like Europe or Canada. I think people are now considering that, whereas previously we had open doors to everyone. It's a question of now, when is this group going to be singled out, or that group? So I think it could have a longer term impact beyond just the small group of people it's already affected.
Dan, can you give us a sense from inside Eli Lilly? There's been noise about the FDA approval process being accelerated. What is that? Have you all been chomping at the bit for that? Is that exciting, or?
Well, certainly we've worked together across the industry to try and improve the ability to get drugs to patients. And I think we're quite optimistic about some of the changes that have been talked about and are actually happening at the FDA already. There's been a lot of excitement and progress with new accelerated review and approval processes like the breakthrough therapy designation, which we've now used twice with great results. There's accelerated approvals, and there's been a lot of progress here on using biomarkers to actually bring a new medicine to patients. So sort of, we talked about HIV this morning and the way that medicines can just lower viral load and use that as a surrogate for preventing AIDS. So too, we can do the same thing in cancer. We can do the same thing in Alzheimer's disease and try and use biomarkers to give us an earlier indication that a new medicine is going to have benefits to patients and bring it forward. So we're pleased by the FDA progress in that direction, as well as new provisions in 21st century cures that actually create additional pathways and promote that as well.
I want to open it up for questions shortly and not monopolize all the time, but before I do that, I was hoping to do sort of a lightning round. If each of you were to be so fortunate as to have the president's ear about one change that he could make in the world of basic research, what would it be? Stephen, I'll start with you.
I would say to fund basic research and increase the funding for basic research. I think that's where the discoveries are made that lead to all these fantastic new medicines and breakthroughs like immunotherapy. That was all done but with basic research. And to not focus as much on the top-down types of structures.
Julie, I'm going to add a rule, which is that you can't say extra funding.
Okay. I wasn't going to anyway. I would say make it an easier climate for partnership. The NIH and federal government in general has a lot of things that can impede partnership, which were put there for good reasons, but there can be unintended consequences, and I would like some of that to get streamlined to make things easier.
Sure.
So from my perspective, it has to continue to be about innovation that changes lives for patients. And we have to make sure that we continue to have a system across the value chain, from discovery and development and drug approval and launch, that rewards those kinds of innovations. That we have to say as a society, we value medicines that can change expectations and make life better for patients. That's critical.
Okay, I want to go to questions, and please do identify yourself. Going once. Oh. Oh, maybe not. All right, a second thing for the president. No, just kidding. No, I did want to ask actually one more question before we wrap up, and that is, what's the biggest dysfunction that you see currently in this system? We're going to do one more lightning round. And try to pick something different than just a funding shortage. Stephen, I'll start with you.
The biggest dysfunction in the system? It doesn't have to do with funding.
How about sourcing talent? So when you, we talked briefly about the travel ban, but you have identified people as being so crucial to what you do. How is this whole world of basic research identifying, very smart, talented, motivated young people and bringing them to Harvard? Have you gotten better at that over time, or
Well, Harvard is a special place because
Sure.
the best people really try to come to your door, and you don't have to go out looking for them; they're coming looking for you. I think that it's interesting because there's always a question about how many jobs there are for people, and in the old days, people would come into academic research and expect to become a professor, and now the math has changed because that's not possible, but there is this incredible resource of industry doing, great biomedical research that our students now are flooding into. So it's really important that people understand, what sort of career choices there actually are when you're coming in to do a PhD, for example, because it's not just PhD becomes professor, now it's PhD runs startup, or joins big pharma and makes breakthroughs and makes things happen for people. So I think it's important for people to realize the breadth of the possibilities of going into a career in research.
And Julie, in the partnership world, when you're sort of putting these deals together, which sound to be very complicated, what do you lose them over? When do they not work?
Well, the devil's always in the details, and we haven't lost many, but where they tend to get hung up on is people's misunderstandings or really different fundamental desires on, how is the data going to flow? When will I get data access? Fundamentally, do I really want a partner, or do I want somebody to just give me something and leave me alone? So it's those sorts of really fundamental things, and there's only like 3 of them, and you can generally see them coming. So,
Yeah.
but like I said, there haven't been that many cases that you really, at the end of the day, if you bring together people who are interested in science and making discoveries to do that, they can generally find a way to get around it.
And Dan, I want to ask you a different question
Okay.
as we close here. What do you miss most about the kind of the smaller startup world?
Well, it's a reasonable question. Actually, I think I don't miss anything. I have the best of the best of both worlds. I think a lot of times people describe startup companies as being small and nimble and able to move quickly, and that's true. But you can also do that in academia. You can also do that in a big company. It's just a little bit harder.
Sure.
So I think that's where I would end up, is just say that sometimes at small companies, it's easier to be nimble. In big companies, you really have to work hard at it.
Yeah. Stephen, Julie, Dan, thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.